President Trump held a campaign rally in Montana last night. I mean, is that what you call it? Giving a speech riddled with falsehoods, lies. Once again, lying to the crowd that he won states that even Ronald Reagan could not. Take a listen.
Reagan had his big win. He won every state except one, the great state of Wisconsin. I won Wisconsin. First time since Dwight Eisenhower in 1952.
Okay, Willie, what do we have to do? Like, this is idiocracy. Like, Trump is watering the lawn with Gatorade now outside the White House. He did not. That's just wrong.
And said with such authority.
Oh,
and by the way,
The
repeated.
crowd
He's said
cheered.
it before. He wants it to be true, so he says it over and over again.
And he knows he's lying because he's heard time and time again here and
I need to ask your brother
that
about
he
this.
did not win Wisconsin. And he's lying to that crowd. And they're cheering for him.
That's the thing.
And by the way, it reminds me of the time that I pushed Neil Armstrong out of the way and I said, "Don't worry, I got this. Where's that flag?" And they all cheer.
Well, the first time.
No, it's wrong.
The first time he said it, you could say ignorance of history. It's a basic history that anyone who follows basic politics knows.
Yeah.
But when he's been corrected about it and he watches TV, he knows it's wrong and says it again. Now we're talking about something different than ignorance.
All right, that was a good one.
When you lie so much, it shows that you're covering for something. So
No, it just shows that he thinks that if he lies enough, he can numb everybody. So they'll stop doing
into
things
believing
like
his crowd side is huge
this.
when it's not. Republican presidential candidates have won Wisconsin seven times in the elections after 1952, including Reagan, who won it by 9 points in 1984.
Wow.
That year, Ronald Reagan won 19 states that Trump did not.
Ouch.
Captured nearly 59% of the vote to Trump's 46%. And Reagan won by nearly 17 million
Well, you see,
in the popular vote.
There's a difference right there,
While
Susan.
Trump lost.
Reagan got
By
more
nearly 3
votes
million.
than his Democratic opponent by almost 17 million. Donald Trump got almost 3 million votes.
Negative.
Less.
Yeah. He really should do a little more homework and prep, I think, when he's doing these speeches. Because, and seriously, the fact that he doesn't care is just so insulting.
The fact that he doesn't care, that he's lying and he knows he's lying.
And it doesn't bother him that he is out there speaking to the American public, giving these falsehoods. Now, this is a small example, but it's really representative of the president we have in the White House.
Jonathan Lemire, though, people in the audience, they're cheering for his lies. And so many times they know he is lying. Like, what is this? Is it like a rock concert, or is it like an act where he's just delivering lines and they just like the lines that are being delivered, even though they know he is lying to them?
Yeah, I think there are a couple things going on at once. First of all, Donald Trump, since his real estate days, has sort of asserted a reality, which of course is not true.
Hold on, they are shooting it tighter. And this is a smaller crowd. Do we have numbers on this crowd?
14.
Because it looks like they had to squeeze the room smaller. What he does is he puts curtains around everybody, and he squeezes them in and pulls them closer when less people show up.
Well,
but anyhow, Lemire.
Right.
So we don't know how many, but we'll get a number on that.
So Trump, I mean, even from his real estate days, the way he would talk to the gossip pages here in New York, he would just assert something is true, even though it wasn't, and just like go with that as his reality. And that is something he has done throughout, and he's certainly carried it over into politics. In terms of the crowd believing those things, I think some of them, yes, it's a rock concert. He says a line, people around them cheer, they cheer too. But I also think Trump has the ability to sow seeds of doubt. People think like, well, if he says it, it must be true. And if the media says it, the media is probably lying to me. They're biased. I'm going to go with him instead.
No, I think this is deadly serious.
They can look in history books. This is we used to mock the Soviets for rewriting history. They would just scrub out facts they didn't like out of history. That's why they had Pravda. Maybe this is why Donald Trump loves Putin so much and loves Russia so much, because they could just really scrub facts, inconvenient facts out of history, and just keep shoving it down people's throats until they started to believe it.
Yeah, I mean, he tells the same lie again and again and again. It's so easy to disprove, especially in this case, one of the most famous elections in American history, winning 49 states, Mondale winning only the state where he was senator. But to me, the worst part of last night, and I know we'll get into it in a minute, is him going after John McCain, who's dying of cancer again. and going after George H.W. Bush,
Who just lost his
who
wife.
just lost his wife and is suffering from Parkinson's disease and is a great American.
Well-
Yeah,
and
it's just
two former
cruel.
presidents.
Yeah.
All right, so last night, President
Yeah.
Trump took aim at some other Republicans, including
Who
his
would do
routine
this?
jab at the ailing John McCain for voting against Obamacare repeal and criticizing former George H.W. Bush's 1,000 points of light rhetoric about service through volunteering.
Wow.
Because we are finally putting America first. We're putting America first. You know, all the rhetoric you used to hear, the 1,000 points of light. What the hell was that, by the way? 1,000 points of light. What did that mean? Does anyone know? I know one thing. Make America great again, we understand. Putting America first, we understand. 1,000 points of light. I never quite got that one. I'm trying to say, what the hell is that? Has anyone ever figured that one out? And it was put out by a Republican, wasn't it?
Yeah, it's about service and giving back to the country. John Meacham, who wrote the biography of George H.W. Bush, tweeted this: "Well, Mr. President, since you ask, it was an image of a nation illuminated by our better angels, offered by a man who gave his life to the service of that nation," talking about President George H.W. Bush.
Well, again, mocking John McCain, who's fighting for his very life right now. And Susan, 1,000 points of light, it was said by a man who dedicated his entire life to actually fulfilling what he believed his responsibility was to help other people.
And his responsibility, he was, I mean, he served in a war, he served his country, he never stopped serving his country in many ways after he was president. And for President Trump to dare go after him, especially at 94 years old, it really just turns my stomach. This is someone, it's painful to watch. This is the President of the United States going after people for a punchline. That's disgraceful. We should expect more. And just to add on that, he also attacked the press exactly 1 week after 5 people lost their lives in a shooting.
We're shot dead in the newsroom. Now, it's, you know, Mika, we can talk about Donald Trump. We have. But again, at what point is there decency in the crowd where people stop cheering when he mocks a man who has brain cancer and who is, again, fighting for his life? A losing struggle for his life. Or George H.W. Bush, a man who fought in World War II, was shot down by the Japanese, served America overseas as ambassador to China, opening up that relationship, served as ambassador to the United Nations, was a congressman, was a vice president, Ronald Reagan's vice president, was the man that helped win the Cold War along with Reagan, was the man who got the message that the Berlin Wall was falling and figured out how to keep this world at peace, was the man who was president when the Soviet Union collapsed on Christmas Day in 1991, and he did nothing but serve his country tirelessly. Again, I mean, I'm not shocked by Donald Trump doing this. Donald Trump doesn't understand this because he is the most selfish man who has ever sat in the White House in his life. Wow. Personally, politically, professionally, you name it, there's overwhelming evidence to prove that. This is about the Republicans that are sitting in the crowds that voted for George H.W. Bush in 1998 and 1992 and voted for John McCain in 2008, who are now sitting there laughing at 2 men in their final days. What does that say about their character?
Well,
Forget
I got
about
the
Donald
number
Trump's.
on that crowd. It's 6,500 people.
Well, they must have found the
speech by
6,500 meanest people.
Well, there are a lot of people who want to go see the President of the United States and feel, you know, special to hear from the President.
But why do you cheer at him mocking a guy? Let's talk about John McCain right now, a guy who was captured, was a prisoner, while Donald Trump was playing ping pong at Ivy League socials. John McCain was getting the hell beaten out of him, so much so that he can't lift his arms above his head. They thought he's dead. They gave him an opportunity to leave. He refused to do so until all of his band of brothers could leave with him. John McCain had a chance to come home.
Hero.
He said, no, I'm not leaving until my band of brothers leave with me. And that's who Donald Trump, the draft dodger?
It's cruel and it's sick and it's everything that we're feeling here. But I think it's also worth noting that there are people whose life experience and service to our country who are saying that this is something worse. Look at Madeleine Albright's book, Fascism, A Warning. And then look at what happened last night at this rally. This is 6,500 people cheering on lies. They are being desensitized as they laugh at those who served our country who are dying right now. And he's bringing them along. And you could argue this is something much more serious that is happening without being hysterical about it. But we have to look at it straight in the eye.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.